In this challenge, you guys are going to implement the sword arc. So let's talk about some of the logic and what we need to do here. We have this sword arc. It has its own animator component, and it has inside here an animator controller. If we double click the controller here, it would take us to the animator view. Currently, if we run the game, it's going to automatically play that sword arc, and it's going to be looping. To fix this, that's an easy one. All you have to do here is go to the sword arc animation that you created and make sure loop time is set to false. That way it just plays once and it's done. Now what you need to do is when you first start the game, it's going to instantly play that animation. Do we want it to? No, we don't. The easy fix here is to create a null state. So here we're going to have basically a new animation state that's none. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to have that be the default animation. So right click it and set layer default state. And from there, what you're going to do is you're going to create a transition to the sword arc. And then once the sword arc has finished playing, it needs to go back to the null state, which is nothing. Now the question here is, how do you transition this animation? Well, similar to how you transitioned your attack animation. When you play your attack animation, you're going to need to create a parameter that's going to trigger to the sword arc. Let's call that a trigger, and let's call it, we'll call it sword animation. So when the sword animation is triggered, it's going to go to the sword arc, and once it's finished, it will go back to none. So to help you guys with the transition, we're going to select it. Has exit time is no. The settings, transition duration is 0, and then what's the logic for going to the sword arc? Add a condition, and it's simply sword animation. When we trigger it, we're going to go to the sword animation, and as soon as it's done on its own, we're going to go back to none. You can make sure that the transition duration is set to 0. Make sure exit time is on. That's going to allow the animation to fully play and then go back to none. That's exactly what we want. Let's save your scene. And from here, we can go into the scripts and talk about some of the logic that we need to create. Once you have Visual Studios open, what is the logic for having our player animator here know about that animation? It's its own object. So here's our player, which has our player animation. You need to now get a reference to the sword arc animator component so that you can call the trigger sword animation. So you'll need a reference to that. So here you have your reference to sword animation. And then basically, here's your attack method. Play sword animation. When you trigger your attack, you're also going to trigger your sword animation. And that's really all you have to do. I'll see you guys in the challenge review.